Okay, folks, we're back live. Look, I want to be clear here. Webster and myself are not disagreeing on this subject of the Anglo-American banking system. The statement I'm making is they made the decision to securitize all these different derivatives to make up all these new flim-flam articles in the last 20 years. There was always a lot of fraud involved in central banking. That's the real banking, where the private families control the government's issuance of currency and credit, and then they can leverage out, 9 to 20 times, depending on the government, what they actually have in deposits. But when you hear that it was countrywide and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and all of this, going out to people that were poor and giving them, 2%, 3%, 4% mortgages that then ballooned later, and that you hear that's what caused all this, that has nothing to do with it. That's less than $100 billion. We're talking about thousands of trillions here. That's admitted numbers. We're talking close to $1 trillion, $940 billion bailed out last week. Now, the point is they already moved into real assets. They wrote white papers how this was going to collapse, how they knew it was going to collapse, and how out of this they're going to set up a new international banking system. And by the way, Kissinger came out last week. A bunch of others came out. Exactly as we told you years ago they would, and said, now we need a world government run by the private bankers, and you buy carbon tax credits from them. And so, yes, is it imploding? Is it a real crisis? Yes, but did they foresee that? Did they at least delude themselves into believing they would control it? There is no debating that. And I don't think Webster disagrees with me on that point, that they opportunistically, as expert opportunist, adepts at it, have, again, they create crises, offer the solution, but the crisis itself is very real. Webster, continue.
Therefore, it's time for us to mobilize to impose a far different outcome, because obviously the Wall Street Group, they've chosen Obama as the main vehicle for this stuff. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, would be the vehicle. Now, the New Deal, of course, without somebody like Jesse Jones, since we're on the radio here in Texas, without Jesse Jones, the state of Texas wouldn't exist. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation in the 1930s and in the 1940s essentially built the industrial infrastructure of the whole state. So that's the New Deal, and that then became private companies. Now, the way to approach this crisis is to say, well, you've got one and a half quadrillion of derivatives, right? That's the avalanche, the mortgage-backed.
For those that don't know, that's just made-up crud.
Yeah, it's complete paper. Now, the subprime mortgage is sort of the firecracker that set off this enormous avalanche. So what you've got to do is realize that the essence of these derivatives is leverage, and as long as that was positive leverage, there was huge super profits at the top. The entire edifice of 1.5 quadrillion of derivatives has now gone into reverse leverage, and that is now a black hole. There's no stopping that.
It's sliding, and its gravitational pull is so powerful, throwing $1 trillion or $5 trillion or $20 trillion at over 1,000 trillion, it's impossible, and in the process of throwing that money at it, you devalue the currency.
Yeah, and they'll be back in January asking for trillions more. So therefore, I think what we've got to do is the following. Target, first of all, the derivatives. The derivatives were illegal up until about 1992, 1993. They were widely considered illegal. We had a law that was based on an attempt to corner the wheat market in 1933 based on options and futures. It was illegal to sell an option on a farm product anywhere in the United States.
Or you put a tax on it so they can't naked short.
You could use a tax. You could use a Tobin tax or security transfer tax on the derivatives and say we demand 1% of derivatives for the public treasury. Let's slap a sales tax on these oligarchs. We're paying sales tax. Let them pay sales tax too. Well, the problem is in this kind of an emergency, and it really is an emergency, I think the best thing to do is Executive Order, Defense Production Act, Trading with the Enemy Act. Derivatives are wiped out. The International Association for Swaps and Derivatives is an enemy alien. We declare economic war on derivatives and anybody who tries to prop them up. They are useless.
Instead, the private inner circle of banks are using federal regulators to even go after some solvent banks that's now coming out to loot them using regulatory power they control. And they, as you said last week on the show, have turned loose the trillions that is being pumped into them out of the Treasury, and they're doing derivatives and leveraging and shorting and attacking the real economy.
Yeah, the entire system is now being run as if the goal of the United States government would be to maintain the derivatives bubble. Now, this has got everything.
And so they're feeding the real economy
backwards
into the black hole to keep it going.
Yeah, and it can't work. So what we've got to say is no. Derivatives have to be wiped out. They've got to be wiped out by executive order. One stroke of the pen. Derivatives are hereby illegal. We wipe them out. And the way that you enforce that, of course, is you take the top 10 banks on Wall Street, starting with J.P. Morgan Chase. They're about half of it. If you add in Citibank and Bank of America, you're up to two-thirds. If you add a few more, the 8 or 10 top banks represent 90 to 95% of the derivatives.
But I want to explain something to people, Webster.
Well, hang on. That means
the average person doesn't understand you, Webster. They don't understand, Webster.
What?
They don't understand, Webster. We're moving too fast. They don't even know that $940 billion was pumped in last week. They think,
you mean, what is that, Federal Reserve lending?
Yes.
All right, so that's lending. I mean, they call that lending. This other thing is even worse because it's basically a giveaway.
And that's my next. I want you to comment on the fact that it gives the Treasury this new above government power.
Yeah, obviously what Paulson wanted was to become a juridical vacuum. I mean, he wanted to become a unique figure in the whole history of the United States, that nothing Paulson did would be reviewable by the courts, by the Congress, by any regulatory agency. I mean, he basically said, make me economic dictator of the United States for life. He could have carried out criminal acts, and nobody could have said a word to him because he has this piece of paper. Now, I think that has probably been cut out of the bill. But, of course, we don't know because the bill, they announced in the dead of night, right after midnight, they announced that there was a deal. The deal has still not been put on paper, as far as I know, so far this afternoon.
There's pieces of it out. It's just they're not taking it out.
All right, it's a monstrosity. In other words, the only thing to do with that is vote it down, load it up with killer amendments, filibuster it, block it. There were about a dozen people in the House who came forward. I saw Kucinich, Kaptur, Issa, a number of others came forward and said that they were against it. But it was a pretty small group. But again, what we need to do, we have to be clear. How do you get out of this? You wipe out derivatives. Now, let's take foreclosures. This is a serious problem. There are lots and lots of foreclosures.
That was my next question. Let me pose it because we're going to move too fast here. Imagine the monstrosity of close to $1 trillion in lending last week to the bankers. Now they're talking about a $5 trillion bailout. That's Bloomberg. Joseph Stiglitz is saying it's over $5 trillion. He calls it a monstrosity. That's actually a quote. He calls it monstrous. And he saw the documents inside what they were planning to do, former head of the World Bank, former chief economist there. And notice the government, only 9% in the latest polls are for this. But notice we have both parties together saying we don't care. The public and the real economy gets nothing. And I'm against the socialism, but if we're going to have it, for heaven's sakes, have it for the people. No, we get nothing. Everything is now transferred to the bankers. Comment on that.
Well, there's a proposal to put $25 billion into the Detroit automobile industry. I would support that, even though the goals of the $25 billion for Detroit are wrong.
That's only a loan. They should just give it to them.
Well, they should. They can lend it to them. They can do it in any number of ways. It might be a good idea to nationalize Chrysler and prevent Cerberus hedge fund from destroying it. I think, generally speaking, you've got to channel money into actual production. Anything that goes for paper is wasted. Forget about paper. Forget about the prices of paper. Think about people and production, and that, again, gets us to foreclosures. If you have people getting thrown out of their homes, family farms shutting down, businesses shut down. Let's suppose you're a truck driver, right? You own your own rig, and you're out there hauling goods on the interstates. Somebody tries to foreclose on you. We need federal protection. And this, of course, that's the opposite of where they're going right now. But we've got to mobilize to impose this, that nobody's thrown out of their home, no family farm is shut down, no rig, no taxi company, no trucking company, no airline, no.
And by the way, people are going to say, well, that's pure socialism. My point is, you don't just throw trillions.
You can call it what you want. Do you want to maintain human civilization in this crisis?
Well, Webster, that's the point I was going to make. Is that instead it's just throw trillions into the bankers' black hole who engineered all of this, right? Or do we at least say, a moratorium on these houses going under, and then pay the $100 billion to literally just give them their houses? No, we'll give tens of trillions, bankrupt everything to the bankers and their paper instead of $100 billion that would have stopped all this. But that's not really true because it wasn't about the houses.
I think you basically formulated the alternatives in a pretty good way. The other thing we have to do is this question of the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve, as everybody knows, is illegal, unconstitutional, criminal, never been audited. It's a monstrosity in its own right. What do we do now? Nationalize it. Seize it. Audit it, nationalize it. You probably send Greenspan to jail.
Stay there. Got a break, Webster. We're going to come back after news, finish up with this, and I promise get into Barack Obama. You are not going to believe this. Criticize Barack Obama. You're going to be arrested. Stay with us.